I signed up to be an aviation cadet. A great number of B25 pilots cracked up their airplanes trying to emulate his takeoff from an aircraft carrier. My tour in India lasted just about a year. I hired on with Naval Intelligence, primarily as a polygraph operator. The entire crew was assembled and given a new aircraft and sent to Europe. Where I was assigned to transition in a B25. The C46 would carry 32 drums of gasoline to the bombers. The tour of duty in India at that time was 750 hours. My name is Hiram Johnson. I was born November the 30th, 1919 in Kansas City, Kansas. I attended all of my schooling in Kansas City, Kansas up through junior college. On my 21st birthday, I joined the Kansas National Guard as it was federated. I was brought into the Guard because, as a company clerk, because I could type, and the medical detachment needed a typist. I didn't last very long in the Guard. As soon as I got a chance, I got out of the Guard and got into the regular Air Corps. At that time, it was a part of the Army. I went through airplane mechanic school at Chinook Field in Rantoul, Illinois. After the end of the schooling, which coincided with the start of the war, I was assigned to Mitchell Field in Long Island, New York. While there, I signed up to be an aviation cadet and was assigned to the Southeast Training Center. I went through pilot training in the Southeast, starting at South Carolina, going through that area, and finally winding up as a twin-engine student pilot when I finished flight school. I was assigned to Mitchell Field as a B-24 student pilot. On completion of the B-24 schooling, the system had a glitch and not very many of my class was able to be crewed. The idea at that time was that the 10-man crew of a bomber all completed their basic training and were gathered together and given a new airplane and flew it to Europe. Inasmuch as I couldn't be crewed, I was palmed off on American Airlines and learned how to fly a C47.
What were some of the, when you were doing your original flight training, what were some of the early airplanes you were flying in then?
The first airplane was a PT-13A, which was open cockpit, bi-winged Stearman. And that was what most of the military pilot training started off in both in the Army and the Navy. From the BT-13, we went from the PT-17 to the PT-13, which was a open cockpit lieutenant who was several years younger than I. And from there I went to advanced, where all of the airplanes were had two engines. We had the PT-17, which was a fabric covered, a BT-10 and a BT-9. From advanced training, I completed that in January of '43 and was commissioned a second lieutenant. From there I went to B25 School, and apparently the thinking of the military at that time was, when a student finished training in a combat aircraft, the entire crew was assembled and given a new aircraft and sent to Europe. The system broke down, and when I finished advanced training and they were unable to crew but a few of us, the idea was that all of the members of a bombing crew finished their training at the same time, and the 10 men that it took to crew a B-24 or a B-17 were all assembled, given a new airplane, and sent to England. And I was most pleased that I wasn't sent to England, because that was the killing grounds of the members of the U.S. Air Force. That's when I was sent to American Airlines to learn how to fly a C-47, and from there to the Ferry Command. Oh, back up. From there to twin-engine bomber school. My next station was Rosecrans Field at St. Joe, Missouri, where I was assigned to transition in a B-25. My instructor was one of the female instructors in the Air Corps at that time. She was at least as big as I was and an excellent pilot. I learned one thing about the B-25 that stuck with me, in that a B-25 was the only airplane I was aware of that the wings had a negative dihedral. That is, when the airplane was on the ground still, the wings slanted downward just a trifle, and when a takeoff run was started, the first thing the pilot had to do was to raise the nose wheel off the ground, because the wing didn't point skyward, it pointed downward. After Doolittle's amazing flight to Tokyo, word got out of the B-25 bombings, and a great number of B-25 pilots cracked up their airplanes trying to emulate his takeoff from an aircraft carrier. After B25 school, I was sent to Los Angeles, not Los Angeles, but to Southern California, and wound up as co-pilot on aircraft deliveries from the factory to the modification center. In those days, airplanes were turned out in a basic model because the factories were set up to operate that direction. After they were completed, they went to Long Beach, where they were sent around to various modification centers around the country. And that was what I was doing. I was co-pilot on deliveries of B-17s to Dallas, Kansas City, and other stations where they were equipped with the latest refinements. After that tour, I was assigned to C46 School at Reno, Nevada, and from there to India, where I spent a year flying the Hump in a C46, hauling gasoline to the B-29s stationed in northern China. The C46 would carry 32 drums of gasoline to the bombers. The reason we were hauling their gasoline was that they burned too much gasoline to act as ferrying ships. The tour of duty in India at that time was 750 hours for aircrew. I put in 750 hours, most of it hauling gasoline from India to China. My tour in India lasted just about a year, and ended when war was ended in Europe, and I was rotated home to Kansas City, and was discharged from the Air Corps, Air Force, Army Air Force. I worked for a short time for the Santa Fe Railroad working for the division engineer while they were building a hump yard. A hump yard is an area on the railroad where a mound is erected and a person in a tower was guided various railroad equipment down a ramp into make up trains and segregated the vehicles as to the direction they were supposed to go. I was out of the service for about a year and a half or 2 years, and then finally went back in as a staff sergeant based on my military rank as a first lieutenant. I worked in the Fairfax field at Kansas City, Kansas for a short time. And then I learned of the opportunity to go into the Office of Special Investigations because I could type. I spent several years in the OSI, winding up in Europe. By that time I was a polygraph operator and spent the rest of my tour in Europe. And when the Korean War erupted, I was recalled to active duty as a first lieutenant. I spent my tour in Europe in Bremen, Munich, and Vienna. We had 2 children born in Munich, and I took my wife and 2 children with me to Vienna and was there several months to the end of my assignment, which was at that time was 3 years. When I was reassigned to the U.S., I was in Texas. I was sent to Texas and assigned to Austin and various other stations in Texas. By this time, as a polygraph operator, I had various assignments on a short-term basis. After my tour in Europe, I was assigned to Texas, primarily in the Dallas area, and continued as a polygraph operator. And finally, at the end of my tour in the Air Force, I hired on with Naval Intelligence, primarily as a polygraph operator, and I didn't care for the usage the Naval Intelligence made of me, and at the first opportunity I left them and went back to the Air Force as a civilian employee. I finally left the Air Force and went to civil service, primarily in Fort Worth, Texas. And my last tour with the Air Force was in Fort Worth at the onset of the program to eliminate people who were trying to dismember, dismantle airplanes in the air. The first indication, the first attempt to do this was to set up metal detectors at all aircraft departure points, and set up a metal detector and try to detect firearms. To test this, we had small pistols encased in plastic, and we would check out the metal detectors throughout the area. There was a lot of resistance from the public to this program because up until this time, boarding an airplane was like boarding a streetcar. There was nothing to it. You had a ticket and you just got on the airplane and flew. But now all entry onto airplanes was restricted to those who could prove they didn't have a gun on them. I finally decided to retire from the Air Force employment, Air Force employment, when I would turn 60. And since then, I have not been employed in any shape or form. My wife and I, by this time, had 5 children, and we settled in Dallas, Texas, and bought a home on an extra large lot. And my sons and I erected a 2-story barn and several outbuildings, and started gardening for pleasure and household profit. That occurred until I was in my late 80s, and then we had an opportunity to sell our house at a handsome profit and moved into a retirement home and have lived there since to date.